The crowd roars. Steel glints in the October sun. A queen's neck rests against cold wood, and in that final heartbeat before blade falls, all of France holds its breath. But what you don't know, what history barely whispers, is the secret she carried to that scaffold. A truth so devastating it could have changed everything. This is the end of the story that began with silk and diamonds, with a 14-year-old Austrian girl who thought she could dance her way through revolution. Her name was Marie Antoinette, and this is how a queen becomes a ghost. But before we reach that blood-soaked morning, you need to understand what really happened in those glittering halls. You need to know about the letter that was never sent, the confession that was never heard, and the choice that doomed a kingdom. Stay with me, because what you think you know about Marie Antoinette is only half the story. Close your eyes and let the weight of centuries settle around you like velvet curtains drawn against the night. We are drifting back to the mist of time, to a world where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on marble floors, where silk whispers secrets in hallways lined with gold. The year is 1774, and the air itself seems to shimmer with possibility and peril. But here's what the history books won't tell you about that moment when young Marie Antoinette first set foot in France. She was not just a princess. She was a weapon, a living, breathing chess piece in the game played by empires. At 14, she already carried the weight of Austrian expectations and French suspicions, her very existence a political statement written in powdered curls and diamond earrings. The carriage wheels that brought her from Austria still echo through the centuries, each turn marking not just miles, but the countdown to revolution. Inside that gilded prison on wheels, a girl practiced curtsying to her reflection in a silver mirror, unaware that she was rehearsing for her own destruction. The Austrian ambassador had given her one piece of advice that would haunt her forever. Smile always, my dear. In France, a queen's smile is more powerful than a king's sword. How tragically wrong he was. France stretches before us like a kingdom caught between dream and nightmare. In the distance, beyond manicured gardens where fountains sing their eternal songs, the scent of jasmine mingles with something darker, the faint, acrid smell of discontent that drifts on the evening breeze. But there's something else in that air, something the courtiers don't yet recognize. The metallic taste of coming blood. Listen carefully, and you can almost hear it. The rustle of taffeta, the gentle clink of porcelain, and beneath it all, like a heartbeat growing stronger, the whispered murmurs of a people beginning to stir. But what you're really hearing is the sound of time running out, each tick of the palace clocks marking another step toward a scaffold that doesn't yet exist. Here, in this moment suspended between twilight and dawn, we meet the young woman whose death we witnessed in that terrible flash of steel and sunlight. But the question that will haunt us through every gilded corridor and shadow-filled alcove is this. Could all have been different? Was there a moment, one single, crucial moment, when the course of history might have turned? The answer lies hidden in the very walls we're about to enter, and it will change everything you thought you knew about the woman they call the Mad Queen of France. Step with me into the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, where morning light fractures into 1,000 golden fragments, each one reflecting a different version of truth. The floor beneath our feet is polished to such perfection that it reflects not just our image, but our very souls. Here, in this cathedral of vanity and power, the rhythm of court life unfolds like an intricate dance that never ends, a dance that Marie Antoinette must learn perfectly, because one misstep could cost her everything. But what nobody tells you about Versailles is that it was designed to be a prison. Every mirror, every window, every door was positioned to ensure that privacy was impossible, that every gesture was observed, every whisper recorded. Louis XIV had built it not as a palace, but as a magnificent cage of nobility, and now Marie Antoinette finds herself its most beautiful and most watched prisoner. She moves through these gilded rooms like a swan across still water, her powdered hair rising toward heaven like a monument to excess. But look closer. See how her hands tremble when she thinks no one is watching? Notice how her smile falters for just a heartbeat between conversations? The rustle of her silk gown creates its own music, harmonizing with the gentle scratch of quills on parchment and the soft percussion of fans snapping open and close, but it cannot drown out the whispers that follow her everywhere. Lautrichian, the Austrian, the foreign queen who will never truly belong. Every morning brings the elaborate ritual of the lever, dozens of courtiers gathering to witness the simple act of a queen rising from her bed, each gesture prescribed by centuries of tradition. But what they don't see is what happens before the curtains are drawn back, in those precious moments when Marie Antoinette is still just a young woman, scared and alone, pressing her face into her pillow to muffle the sobs that her position forbids her to shed in public. The Duchess de Polignac, her closest friend and perhaps her greatest weakness, whispers poison into her ear disguised as sweet comfort. Let them hate you, ma chérie. Their hatred is proof of your power. But what the Duchess doesn't tell her is that she's already sold information about the Queen's private moments to the pamphleteers of Paris. Even here, in the sanctuary of friendship, betrayal waits with a smile. The air is heavy with the perfume of roses and bergamot, while servants glide like ghosts between rooms, their footsteps muffled by carpets so thick they seem to swallow sound itself. But these servants, the ones no one notices, the ones whose presence is taken for granted, they are the real historians of Versailles. They see everything, hear everything, remember everything, and they are beginning to share their stories beyond these golden walls. In the Queen's private chambers, porcelain shepherdesses stand frozen in eternal pastoral bliss, while real sheep graze in the carefully constructed hamlet beyond the windows, a fantasy countryside built for a queen who has never known hunger, never felt the rough texture of homespun cloth against her skin. This petit hameau, this make-believe farm, will later become evidence of her disconnection from reality. But what her critics don't understand is that it was built not from arrogance, but from a desperate longing for simplicity that her position would never allow. Here, time moves differently. Meals arrive on silver platters like offerings to the gods. Wine flows like rivers of liquid ruby. And the greatest concern is whether one's rouge is applied to perfection. A single dinner for the royal family costs more than a peasant family earns in a decade. Yet the Queen has never been taught to connect these numbers to human suffering. She lives in a world where abundance is as natural as breathing, where the idea that food could run out is as foreign as the concept of walking. But there's something else happening in these perfumed halls, something that will prove far more dangerous than any battlefield. Marie Antoinette is falling in love, not with her husband, that dutiful, awkward man who visits her bed like a tenant paying rent, but with Count Axel von Fersen, the Swedish nobleman whose very presence makes the air electric with forbidden possibility. The courtiers speak in whispers and innuendo, their words as delicate and dangerous as the crystal glasses they raise in endless toast to nothing and everything. But tonight, as we watch in the shadows, something is different. Tonight, Marie Antoinette will make a choice that will echo through history like a gunshot in a cathedral. What is that choice? And how will it seal the fate of a kingdom? Stay with me, because the answer lies in a letter that was never meant to exist, and that will change everything you think you know about the woman they call the Austrian whore. But listen, do you hear that? Beneath the gentle strains of the harpsichord, beneath the laughter that echoes through marble halls, there's another sound growing stronger. It begins as a whisper, like wind through wheat fields, but it carries something that makes the crystal tremble in the chandeliers. It's the sound of France awakening, and it's coming for the palace gates. The letters arrive like dark birds at dawn, each one carrying news that grows progressively darker. Reports from beyond the palace gates speak of bread that costs more than a day's wages, of children with hollow cheeks and eyes that burn with something more dangerous than fever. In the perfumed parlors of Versailles, these realities seem as distant as tales from foreign lands. Yet they seep through the golden walls like water through cracked stone, drop by drop, until even the most oblivious courtier begins to sense that something fundamental has shifted. But here's what you need to understand about that shift. It wasn't gradual. History teaches us that revolution comes slowly, building like steam in a kettle. But that's not how it really happens. Revolution comes in moments, sharp, crystalline instance when the world cracks open and shows its true face. For Marie Antoinette, that moment comes on a Tuesday morning in October 1785, when her valet approaches with a letter bearing no seal, no signature, no identifying marks. Inside, in handwriting she doesn't recognize, are 3 words that will haunt her for the rest of her short life. They know everything. The diamond necklace affair has exploded like a bomb in the heart of French society. A scandal so baroque, so impossibly convoluted that it reads like a fever dream. A cardinal deceived by a courtesan impersonating the queen. A necklace worth more than a ship of the line. Forged letters and midnight meetings in the Grove of Venus at Versailles. Marie Antoinette is innocent of everything except the one crime that will destroy her. She looks guilty. The pamphlets appear overnight like poisonous flowers after rain. They call her Madame Deficit and worse, much worse. They describe her in ways that would make a courtesan blush, accusing her of every sin from lesbianism to treason. But it's not the accusations that terrify her. It's how eagerly the people believe them, how hungry they are for reasons to hate her. In her private study, she reads these libelous by candlelight, each word a small knife cutting away at her sense of self. She doesn't understand that she's witnessing the birth of a new kind of warfare, not fought with cannons and cavalry, but with words and images, with the power of a story to become more real than reality itself. Marie Antoinette, still so young, still believing in the divine right of beauty and grace, tries to dance away the gathering storm. Her world has become a stage where she performs the role of queen, without understanding that the audience has begun to change. The gentle applause of her courtiers no longer drowns out the growing rumble from the streets of Paris, where voices rise like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She increases the frequency of her gambling parties, as if the clink of coins and the rustle of cards could somehow silence the whispers of rebellion. The amounts lost in a single evening would feed a village for a year, but she has never learned to think in such terms. Money, for her, is as limitless as sunlight, as natural as the air she breathes. But Count von Fersen sees what she cannot. During their secret meetings in the Petit Hameau, as she plays at being a milkmaid, while he plays at being a simple farmer, he tries to warn her. "They don't hate you personally, Antoinette," he whispers, using the pet name that could cost them both their heads. "They hate what you represent. You become a symbol of everything they cannot have." She laughs, that silver laugh that once charmed all of Europe, and feeds cake to her sheep. Let them eat cake. She never actually said, but the phrase will be attributed to her anyway, because it captures something true about the distance between her world and theirs. Not cruelty, but a kind of cosmic ignorance, a failure to understand that other people might live in a universe with different laws than her own. In the gardens, where she once played at being a simple milkmaid, the very flowers seem to lean away from her touch. The fountains still sing, but their song has changed. No longer a lullaby, but something that sounds suspiciously like a warning. Yet she cannot hear it, wrapped as she is in silken certainty, surrounded by mirrors that show her only what she wishes to see. The revolution begins not with cannons, but with whispers, not with violence, but with a terrible realization that the golden cage of Versailles has become a prison, and that beauty, no matter how exquisite, cannot stop the tide of history when it finally decides to turn. But there is still time. Even now, even as the storm clouds gather, there are choices to be made, paths that could lead away from the scaffold that waits 15 years in the future. The question is, will she make them? And what price will France pay for the answers? Stay with me, because what happens next will determine not just the fate of a queen, but the future of a nation. The letter she will write tonight, the one that was never meant to exist, contains a secret that could have saved her life, if only she had been brave enough to send it. And now the mirrors begin to crack. One by one, the certainties of a lifetime shatter like dropped crystal, each piece reflecting a different facet of a world turned suddenly, violently upside down. The sweet perfume of the court mingles now with the sharp smell of gunpowder and fear, creating a new fragrance that burns the throat and brings tears to the eyes. October 5th, 1789. The date burns itself into history like a brand. The women of Paris, driven by hunger and rage, march on Versailles through mud and rain, their voices raised in songs that speak of bread and blood in equal measure. Marie Antoinette stands at her window watching them approach, and for the first time in her life, she truly understands that she is mortal. But here's what the history books don't tell you about that terrible night. The Queen had warning. Count von Fersen, risking everything, had smuggled her a message 3 days earlier. The women are coming, and they want your head. There's still time to flee. There are boats waiting in Le Havre. Safe passage to Austria, to Sweden, to anywhere but here. She burns the message without answering. Not from courage, but from a kind of paralysis that comes when reality finally breaks through the walls of fantasy. For 20 years, she has lived in a world where problems can be solved with the right dress, the perfect smile, another party. Now she faces a problem that requires her to become someone she has never been, a woman who can make choices without a script. The mob storms the palace at dawn. They move like a tide to the grand apartments, their rough hands touching surfaces that have known only silk and velvet. They're looking for the Austrian, which the whore queen, the woman who has stolen their bread to buy her diamonds. They don't find her. She's in behind a secret door that even the servants don't know about. But they find her apartments, and they destroy everything with thoroughness that speaks of years of accumulated rage. Marie Antoinette watches through a crack in the wall as they tear apart her dresses, rip the heads from her dolls, smash her porcelain with stones brought from the streets of Paris. It's not random violence. It's ritual, the careful destruction of a world that never should have existed. When the royal family is finally captured and brought to Paris, she rides in a carriage that moves like a hearse through streets lined with faces that show no mercy. These are her subjects, the people she was born to rule, but they look at her with a kind of hatred usually reserved for plague carriers or child killers. The crowd follows them for hours, singing the Sierre, that new song that promises to hang aristocrats from lampposts. The Tuileries Palace becomes their prison, though they call it protective custody. Here, stripped of ceremony and surrounded by guards who would rather be her executioners, Marie Antoinette begins to discover who she really is beneath the costume of queenship. She spends her days teaching her children to read, writing letters to her mother that will never be delivered, and slowly coming to understand the magnitude of what they have lost. The nights are the hardest, in the darkness. When the children are asleep and Louis sits in his chair staring at nothing, she allows herself to remember, not the grand balls or the elaborate ceremonies, but smaller things. The way morning light looked through the windows of her petit amour, the sound of her dog's breathing as it slept beside her bed, the feeling of von Fersen's hand in hers during those secret walks through the garden. She begins to write, pages and pages of careful script that she hides beneath loose floorboards. Not memoirs, but something more dangerous. Truth. She writes about the loneliness of being always watched, never touched except in ceremony. She writes about the weight of representing an entire nation when you've never been taught how to represent yourself. She writes about the impossible choice between duty to your children and duty to your crown. Most dangerously, she writes about love, real love, the kind that makes you willing to betray everything you've been taught to honor. She writes about Count von Fersen with the kind of honesty that could destroy what little reputation she has left, describing not just stolen kisses, but the way he made her feel like a woman instead of a symbol. The trial approaches like winter, inevitable and cold. They will accuse her of correspondence with foreign enemies, of betraying state secrets, of corrupting her son. The evidence is largely fabricated, the outcome predetermined, but the charges aren't entirely false. She has written letters to her brother in Austria. She has begged for foreign intervention. When your choice is between treason and watching your children starve, what would you choose? In her cell in the conciergerie, she finds herself stripped of everything except her own reflection, and even that has become strange to her. The elaborate wigs are gone, the powdered face scrubbed clean, revealing a woman who looks younger and older than her years, vulnerable as a child, yet marked by sorrows that have aged her beyond measure. In the gray light filtering through barred windows, she moves like a sleepwalker, her hands reaching for luxuries that are no longer there, her lips forming words that no one wishes to hear. But there's something else happening in that cell, something the guards don't recognize. She's finally becoming herself, without courtiers to please, without appearances to maintain, without even hope to sustain her. Marie Antoinette discovers reserves of dignity she never knew she possessed. Her letters, written by candlelight on rough paper, speak not of jewels and gowns, but of love for her children, of regret for misunderstandings, of a strange peace that comes only when all illusions have been burned away. The confession that was never heard waits in those hidden pages, still buried beneath the floorboards of the Tuileries. In them, she takes responsibility not just for her own blindness, but for the blindness of her entire class. She understands, finally, that the revolution wasn't born from jealousy, but from justice, that the people who called for her death weren't monsters, but mothers and fathers driven to desperation by a system that valued her comfort more than their survival. If I had understood earlier, she writes, if I had seen beyond the mirrors of Versailles, perhaps, but regret is a luxury I can no longer afford. Let history judge me as it will. I die knowing, at least, who I really am. The blade falls on a morning when the air itself seems to hold its breath, and with it falls not just a queen, but an entire way of being, a world where beauty was currency and pleasure was purpose, where the divine right of king seemed as permanent as the stars themselves. But the story doesn't end there, because sometimes the truth survives longer than the people who try to bury it. Now, as dawn breaks over quiet fields of memory, we find ourselves standing in a place where time moves differently, where the ghosts of history walk among us like old friends returning from a long journey. The palace of Versailles still stands, its mirrors reflecting not the powdered faces of courtiers, but the wondering eyes of visitors who come to glimpse a world that once was. But there's something these modern pilgrims don't know, something that changes everything about the story they think they're seeing. In 1989, exactly 200 years after the revolution that destroyed her, workers renovating the Tuileries Palace found something extraordinary. A cache of letters hidden beneath floorboards that have remained undisturbed for centuries. Marie Antoinette's secret writings. Her real testimony. The confession that was never heard. The letters reveal a woman far more complex than history has allowed her to be. Not the vapid butterfly of popular imagination, but someone struggling with impossible choices in an impossible situation. They show us a mother who had given up her throne to save her children, a wife trapped in a loveless marriage, a queen who finally understood the cost of her privilege, but learned that understanding too late to change anything. Most remarkably, they contain a letter never sent to the people of France, an apology so profound, so genuine in its recognition of the suffering caused by royal blindness, that it might have changed the course of history. Written in the days before her execution, it speaks with a voice we've never heard from her before. Clear, honest, unadorned by ceremony or self-pity. My people, it begins, I have failed you not from malice but from ignorance, and ignorance in a queen is a crime worse than malice in a commoner. You had the right to expect that I would see your suffering, that I would understand my duty to you before my duty to ceremony. I did not. For this, I ask not forgiveness, for some failures are beyond forgiveness, but understanding. I go to my death not as a martyr, but as a woman who learned too late what queenship truly means. In these halls, if you listen carefully on nights when the moon is full and the air is still, you might hear more than a faint rustle of silk, more than the gentle tap of high heels on marble. You might hear the sound of a woman writing by candlelight, finally telling the truth that could have saved a kingdom if it had been spoken 20 years earlier. Marie Antoinette walks here still, perhaps, but she is not the same ghost the tourists expect to find. She is not the frivolous queen or the martyred saint of popular imagination, but something more unsettling. A woman who looks back at her choices with a clarity that comes only after all choices have been made. She sees the revolution now not as a senseless tragedy, but as a necessary correction, a violent rebalancing of scales that had tipped too far toward inequality. Her story whispers to us across the centuries about the terrible fragility of power, the dangerous distance between palace and street, between dream and reality. But it tells us something else, too, that redemption is possible even in the shadow of the scaffold, that understanding can bloom even in the wasteland of regret. She reminds us that beauty without compassion is merely decoration, that privilege without responsibility is just another form of blindness, but also that the human capacity for growth never ends, not even in a prison cell, not even with the blade already sharpened. The revolution that killed her also created the possibility of a world where such extremes of wealth and poverty might not exist, where children don't starve while others feast on gold. She died as a symbol of the old world, but in those hidden letters, she becomes something else, a voice for the new one, speaking across centuries to remind us that change is possible, but that it comes at a cost that someone always has to pay. In the end, perhaps that's the real tragedy of Marie Antoinette. Not that she died for her blindness, but that she gained sight only when it was too late to use it. Her true confession, that final letter that was never sent, shows us a woman who finally understood what queenship could have meant. Not the divine right to rule, but the sacred obligation to serve. Rest now, and let her story settle into your dreams like silk scarves drifting down through twilight air. But remember the letter beneath the floorboards, the confession that was never heard, the truth that waited 2 centuries to be discovered. Let the weight of her sorrow and the lightness of her laughter teach you something about the strange dance we all perform between birth and death, between the roles we play and the truths we carry in our hearts. The candles burn low now in a hall of mirrors, and somewhere in the distance, a fountain sings an eternal song, neither mourning nor celebrating, but simply continuing, as all beautiful things must, long after the dancers have left the floor and the music has faded into memory. Sleep well, and dream of queens and revolutions, of mirrors and roses, of hidden letters and unspoken truths. Dream of all the ways that love and loss weave themselves together in the tapestry of time. And remember, sometimes the most important words are the ones that are never spoken, the confessions that wait in darkness until the world is ready to hear them. Marie Antoinette's final secret is safe with us now, guardians of a truth that history almost lost. In knowing it, we become something more than mere observers of the past. We become witnesses to the eternal human struggle between what we are and what we might have been. The ghost in the mirrors of Versailles smiles now, not with the practiced charm of a courtier, but with a hard-won piece of a woman who finally found her voice, even if she found it too late to save herself. Her story ends not with the fall of a blade, but with the discovery of words that prove redemption is possible for anyone brave enough to face the truth of their choices. In the end, that may be all any of us can hope for, to understand, finally, who we really were beneath the costumes history dressed us in, and to leave behind some record of that understanding for those who come after. Marie Antoinette did that. In the end, her confession survived. Her truth endures. And in the morning light that streams through the windows of Versailles, her ghost walks not in silk and diamonds, but in the simple dignity of a woman who learned at last how to be human.